Super Friends when the time comes?
Yes.
There's 3 tiers of art. There's high art, there's pop art, and then the's low art.
Right.
And then there's Forces of Good and Evil.
Yeah, that is way down there.
You know, I still crack up about that every time. Every time. It is Wednesday. It is another episode of the Mattriarchy. I am, as always, from sunny Scottsbluff, Nebraska, your host, Matthew Reese. And I am joined by a whole herd of folks. And we are here to talk about the death and life of Superman. Because I didn't realize this, guys. But last week was like the 30-year anniversary of that, which I didn't know. And I thought, man, if I'd been thinking, we should have done this last week, but I didn't know about it until like it was too close. So we already had a topic and we did it.
You never want things to be topical. So.
Well, yeah. I don't like going with trends too much, but I've been meaning to do this show for a while. So thank you guys for all coming on.
Like how we start late every episode, we have to do our topics late too.
That's true. That's true. Well, I'm hoping after I get done with this bachelor's degree, we can get back on schedule. Maybe. It'll only be 5 minutes late on the regular. But of course, we've got the medal. We've got Twitless. Well, no. He's down there. It's backwards. Cartoonicus.
You can organize the people so they're where you point.
That's
true. You
can
shift people around.
That's true, but then I still would get it wrong because it's the way. And we got Larry, and of course, Hutch has joined us tonight as we discuss the death and life of Superman. And so, let's start with, because I tell you, man, we're gonna have some fun stuff here. Because Hutch has informed me that there is a big secret on there, stuff that I didn't know, and I was talking to us backstage, and it's neat. This Brady bunch isn't working out, Abigail says. That's fair. But let's start with the thing. Where were you when you first heard, everybody, when you first heard about the death of Superman? Where were you?
Are we talking Alan Moore's death of Superman?
Well, I'm talking about the big one, the anniversary one.
I saw the ads for it.
I think I actually heard about it on the radio, believe it or not. Because I wasn't really following Superman at the time, and I think I actually heard a news blurb on the radio, and then went down to the shop to find out what was going on with all of that.
I was turning 1.
Fair.
And I now feel like I'm being kicked in the gut now. Thank you.
Well, to be fair, I also pooped my pants when I heard about it, so we're even. No, I did not. But I read the news story that they were going to do that, so it was like way before they actually, did it. So, it was right around 91, right? That we're talking about.
It was 92.
92. Excuse me. Okay, yeah, and thus we just missed it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was right at the last year. That's when I graduated college. Was spring of 92. So I remember hearing about this, and that's what was unique about that time is that's when you started hearing about the news of what's going to be in the comics. And I loved in the 80s when stuff just showed up and I was like, oh wow, look what's happening in Justice League this month. And that was before previews and catalogs and everything. And so by 92, that's when I'd say a large number of the comics buying crowd was attuned to knowing what was going to happen in 4 to 6 months. So
it was a more civilized time back then before we knew about this stuff.
Yeah.
Before I was around Rampage.
Before the dark times. Before paid DLC.
So, Twitless, were you knowledgeable, aware, old enough to hear about the death of Superman back in the 90s, or are you in metal territory?
Sorry, I don't know why you're talking.
I have vague memories of this stuff, I think my dad might have bought, because I remember the black bag. So so my childhood has memories of the black bag. I think my dad might have bought it, and I think he bought the famous follow-up post-funeral where John Kent. It's actually when we did the panel on your favorite story. It's that one.
Yeah.
So I remember those two because those were imprinted on my youthful child brain as things I recognized, and so I wouldn't recognize it unless I'd seen it. But I was too young to really process what I was seeing. And so the child me mostly just saw those images and thought mostly they were just really scary. So I was cognizant of it, but very barely so. Did not have full reading literacy, did not have comics literacy. I was just like, they're just, scary looking pictures. And I remember the coloring throwing me off on the Jonathan Kent one, which is deliberately, made that way. But
right. How about you, Cartoonicus?
So I don't think I heard about it until sometime in the early 2000s, actually, when I was watching a documentary about comics and learned that it had happened. However, I do remember this, and I'm not 100%. I've spent ever since trying to figure out how this connects. But when I was maybe 6, 8 years old, there is something I remember learning about. And I'm going to share a screen here. Where is it? Oops, come on. Can't find it. It's in my... Don't know why I can't find it. Here we go. Anybody remember this guy?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, I do.
I have always suspected that this was like the final incarnation after all this stuff was going on, that this was supposed to be Ghost Superman, I think is the deal. This is the guy who bullets supposedly went straight through.
No, it was dumber than that.
It's not Ghost. It's not Ghost Superman. But
that would have been a really fun idea, but that's not what they did at all.
That's the major thing I remember.
Eradicator was Ghost Superman, essentially.
I remember reading in God's World the update about how they were going to this is the new Superman, and here's his new costume, and bullets bounced off the old Superman. Bullets go right through the new Superman.
Yeah, that was separated by about 4 years, 4 to 5 years between Morrison's run and the death of Superman.
That was all over the news, though. I remember the news spots.
So the Energy Superman was Grant Morrison's idea? I didn't know that.
I don't know if it was during his run on JLA. I don't know that it was his idea.
It wouldn't surprise me if it's a bad idea in comics. It's often got him at the root. I'm not saying I say that, and I actually do appreciate some Grant Morrison, but he is a wellspring of bad ideas.
But so my big question that I can finally have answered tonight was: did this happen before or after the death of Superman?
Quite a bit after. Quite a bit after.
All right.
Yeah. You could have asked any time. I'm here.
I'm also here. You have access to old people who were around back then.
These are shower thoughts.
I can actually
There's
tie
also
this
the
in.
Come to me
internet.
at the most inconvenient time.
I can actually tie this into the death of Superman, though, because in each case, Mike Carlin went out and said, "This is permanent. We're never bringing him back. He is dead. We're never bringing him back." And of course, it's just pipe, and they bring him back. And when this came out, he said, "This is his permanent form now. We're say goodbye to the old costume. This is it from now on." And then, Grant Morrison's like, "I don't want to put this in Justice League. Can you just do your crap? And when he comes back, can I just leave him in his old costume?" And they're like, "No, because we need to convince everybody that, he's always going to be this electric thing." And then, he had to be that way in Justice League. And then a few months later, he's back, which is just what Grant Morrison knew. So, yeah, that explains that. So I'm sorry, I've been on mute talking and ranting and raving. And
darn,
I'm on mute. No, but yeah, so this was probably 5 years afterwards.
All right. So in a way, that's kind of my weird introduction to the whole thing.
But DC Comics has had this weird fixation of trying to do a soft reboot on Superman since the death of Superman.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's true. That's true.
I mean, why have the soft reboot of one of the most popular things ever versus just keeping it going?
Because it wasn't popular enough, I guess.
I mean, ask whoever created the.
Okay, so Carlin Jurgens, there's a really good panel they did as a retrospective, and there's some other reading on it, and the kind of insider baseball on it is very fascinating, because do we want to get into this right now, or do we want to?
I love it. I love it. Just in a second.
Yeah,
I want to go back on my own reflection on.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah,
I was not into Superman. I had gotten into comics a year and a half before the death of Superman. And I was not into Superman, right? I was in the Batman family, like that was my thing. I was street level heroes and martial arts and detective work and all that kind of stuff. Tim Drake had become Robin, and all of this amazing kind of stuff was going on, and like that's where I was in, right? But when I was a child, a wee little Reese back in the 80s, you could still read Superman in the newspaper in the Sunday edition.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They still had Superman comics in the Douglas Herald or whatever. I mean, not the Douglas Herald. There's the Tulsa Herald back when I was a very small child. So that and Super Friends and the Fleischer cartoons and Superman was part of my childhood. But when I got into comics, I didn't have an interest. And then I heard, like I said, I was pretty sure it's on the radio, a news article talking about, that Superman's gonna die. And I was like, nah, that's nonsense. I couldn't even get my head around it. But that gum, if that didn't like pull me in. And that's at the same time that, Bruce Wayne had his back broken and the whole Azrael story was going on and all that kind of crazy stuff was going on, like all at the same time. And so it was a chaotic time to be a new comic book reader for me.
Actually, I believe that was after the death of Superman, precisely because the death of Superman sold so well that the next thing was,
I'm not sure exactly.
Comics chase trends.
You might be right. You might be right on that. I might be misremembering.
Man,
and then Emerald Twilight, yeah.
Right.
And then
Emerald Twilight was right after that. Which that's
I'm pretty sure Death comes first.
Okay, now I got to look up the year of the death of Sally Acorn.
So it's
not.
With the thing, is that was one of the things that got me into reading Superman comics, and like they were still doing the triangle numbering, so like you could read, every week a new Superman comic would come out, and they were all tied together into this macro story. They all had different flavors for the different writers, but man, I got hooked in really hard for like 6 months of Superman books. And it all came about that, and I grew to appreciate Superman in a way that I had just kind of tossed him off to the side of me as kids stuff, right? I don't ever got to worry about that. I'm a Batman fan. We're serious about our comic books. We're serious about our crime stories. That's Superman, But man, the death of Superman story was one that drew me into the world of Superman and to that concept of the character in a way that like I wasn't invested before. And so I know that for some people, the whole stunt and everything turned them off. But for me, it actually keyed me into what was going on, what those guys had built into Metropolis. So
I'm actually going to be one of the people who defends the story.
I'm a little bit older than you, so I was there before Crisis on Infinite Earths, before John Byrne. But John Byrne had and Marv Wolfman were the two guys who rebooted Superman in '86, and those first 2 years were really exciting. And then John Byrne left, and it kind of struggled for a while because it ended with him killing the 3 Phantom Zone villains in the other universe. And then there was like a very long space odyssey where he's tormented about it. And I found that really interesting. And then then Dan Jurgens came on, and he was bouncing through time, and he proposes to Lois and reveals his identity. And none of this stuff seems to be selling the Superman books as well as it should be. So that's when they kind of hit upon the stunt of killing him off. And I'd say right around then, like you say, the diamond things on the covers was to keep you buying all the Superman books in order. And it seemed like a never-ending soap opera.
So Carlin actually does have I don't know if this is the reading I've done and the interviews that I've seen they add a little bit more context to that. It wasn't just, oh, he's not selling, we're killing him off. Carlin actually goes and says that is not what happened. So I don't know. I think some of that was kind of some rumor mill getting started. He says that a lot of it actually started because and it was him and Wheezy and Jurgens and Ordway and so on, and they were basically writer's room, and Carlin wouldn't let them leave until they had there was this kind of like board they had to fill with stories for the next few, I guess, months or whatever, and they had to fill all the boxes until they could go home. And so one of their defaults was kill him, because it was something they could just fill one of the slots of stories, because it's always something that you could do. We could kill him. But so like, if they have like 10 slots, we only have to come up with 9, because one of them is always going to be, we're going to kill him. So essentially this was that was part of it. So that really was part of it. So
we're going to kill the immortal man. Sure.
I'm just saying, like, in terms of when comic book writing is your career and it's a job you have to do, like, it's things you see it differently. So that was part of it. It was always like a spot on the wall, and so it helped them get through the rest of having to fill the slots of potential stories they could do. And the second thing,
like this is, let's put something on there that's so ridiculous that no one will ever go for it.
They were laughing. It was a little bit of something like that. But the second thing that was big is the fact that the main story they were trying to work towards was the marriage between him and Lois. And at the same time, they were doing the Lois and Clark Adventures of Superman show with Dean Cain. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to sync it up so that the marriage on TV would match up with the marriage in the comics. And so they initially had it planned so that they were going to hit a particular date. But then when the scheduling for the show ended up happening, I'm almost done. When the scheduling for the show ended up happening, they had to shuffle things around, and they ended up with a spot that they needed to fill. And so that's where they're like, okay, what are we filling this with? And they were finally like, well, that's when the unthinkable happened, essentially. I guess we're using that slot. And it was kill him. And so, and they ended up seeing it as part of the larger story of a character who dies and comes back and then can get married. So that's how Carlin and the
just like
frames it. Yeah, it's essentially what Carlin. So that's what Carlin said as of very, very recently. Is essentially because there's obviously a lot of rumor mill. Even the people there were kind of remembering it differently. So Carlin at least has at least attempted to set the record straight as that's what it is. Whether or not that's, entirely accurate, is probably up for debate. This happened 30 years ago. But that is the story that he most recently told, and everyone at the panel seemed to nod along with him. So
the story he's telling us is that the publication history of the most popular comic book character at the time was, let's get drunk and drunk drive and see what happens.
No, I was going to say, I feel it was, let's just put this thing on there and trick our boss, and then the boss liked it.
Sorry, Hutch was going to say something there.
I was just going to say that Lois and Clark didn't debut till '95, so that can't be quite right. Because the Death of Superman was '92.
No, that's the point. They wanted to sync it up. That they needed to fill in time. So they originally, the delay of Lois and Clark is why we got the marriage later and we got the Death of Superman sooner. They, I think, originally had it swapped. So it's actually because of when Lois and Clark came out.
I'm saying the show did not debut till '95. Several years after the Death of Superman.
It was still in the works. Like it was just the delays that happened for the show coming out or what impacted the comics. That doesn't contradict what the narrative there.
Yeah, but the marriage wasn't till 4 years, so it was like towards the end of the '90s. So I'm not sure that quite jibes right. They may have known there was a show in the works, but what's that?
Sometimes you have ideas for things and they end up getting shelved and used later.
The marriage thing I think still plays. Again, it's the fact that what ended up happening was the fact that they wanted to sync these things, but they basically they were not able to, and because they were not able to, they had to basically ditch the idea of keeping them in sync, and because they ditched that idea, they were left with some holes to fill, or at least the plan got derailed. And because it got derailed, they ended up needing to kind of go and, okay, what are we going to do now? Because we had a plan, and then Death of Superman basically happened as a result of plans going awry.
So the Lois and Clark show was delayed in production of even coming about, and they knew eventually when that show came out, they would want to have them get married in the show several years down the line. So they had a lot of time to pad. Okay, then that kind of works.
I think that's kind of what Carlin is
They
saying.
I went ahead and looked it up. Lois and Clark, which ran from 93 to 97, it was pitched and sold in 91.
Okay. So that kind of works, yeah.
Yeah, so they were talking about it at the same time when they were talking about these ideas. So like the timeline does match in terms of them talking about it behind the scenes and figuring this stuff out.
And I think they got married at the end of season 3, which would be 95, 96.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
But I don't see it on the list here. Anyway,
all right, so Edming says a touch of the 60s, kill something or turn into a tree or make it fat. When will Twitless have the Omega Girl Fat Ray comic? That might be a little ways ago. I just want the reason I brought this image up in the first place was to bring up that Jerry Siegel killed Superman first. So if you want to blame Jurgens and company for killing Superman, Siegel killed him first.
You showed up late, but we were having an entire argument over who killed Superman first.
Okay,
and I said, was there a killing of Superman during the Super Dickery era? And clearly there was. Now, based on the evidence you've presented.
Yeah, Siegel did it. It's Superman 149, and it's actually it's an Elseworlds story, imaginary novel. It's actually really good. I do recommend reading this issue.
There were so many Death of Superman. Yeah, there were numerous times, and even John Byrne killed him off, and it was for real. He was dead when they first introduced what's her name, the Silver Banshee. She kills Superman and Martian Manhunter, and they actually have the funeral, and people are filing past his casket, and all of a sudden the ghost of Superman emerges from Superman's body, and it's actually Martian Manhunter. So yeah, it's like a one issue, one and done thing, but they really did kill him off and go through the whole thing of announcing that Superman is dead and we're having a funeral, but they did it in like 2 pages. So yeah.
So
the whole funeral for a friend is in 2 pages.
Yeah. So on that though, I want to point the finger, or the spotlight, I should say, over to Hutch, because he was sharing some stuff with me and with us before we got started too. That I'll go ahead and give him the screen here and go ahead and show us what you got, Hutch.
Yeah, I'll do that. I just spilled soda all over my desk, but I guess I won't duck out now. Hang on, here we go. This is 1985, the last episode of the Super Friends cartoon. The Superpowers Team Galactic Guardians is the Death of Superman. And in that one, let's bring up the buttons here so I can click through it. You can see the flag going to half-staff on the White House. And they actually have the armbands with the Superman logos on them. Yeah. So kind of 2 brown shirts with black armbands doesn't look good. Here's a news reporter, and you can see the casket. The people carrying it are Batman and Flash and Aquaman, and this is Samurai. And let's see, we have the people watching it take off. They fly the casket away through space, and all the alien ships are lined up to see it. And these aliens actually say, "Until the next dimension, Superman," which is the line from the last Starfighter, which came out a year earlier. So it's possibly an inside joke. And of course, he is brought back by the end of the episode, but it was the last episode of the Super Friends.
Can you imagine being a kid? I can imagine being a kid in 85, but I didn't see this episode when it came out. But can you imagine being a kid and like you're watching this whole thing and just like, what? You can't just kill him. What?
What really makes this episode is that Adam West is doing the voice of Batman in these final series. And oh my gosh, the villains will be up to even worse now that Batman is gone. It's just, oh my gosh, it's overwrought. I know we have a lot of love for Adam West, but at the same time, it's like, oh my goodness, he's quite the clown when he wants to be. And it's such a serious moment. And it's just, yeah, I would play it, but that would get this, copyright grabbed. So, but that's...
So when it comes to the story that we're the 92 one, in addition to some of the plot filling or Lois and Clark connections and filling holes on a wall, there's also there's a couple other interesting things that I think are very interesting that this story was meant to do. Whether or not it succeeds at that is something we can definitely discuss. But
take me off full screen.
Oh, sorry, Hutch.
That's okay. Everybody's watching me. Go ahead.
I'm all in my own mode here.
And we've got Neostar in chat and Jim Tuner. Good to see you guys. Edming and Fizz and Rab and a bunch of our regular chat miscreants. Good to see you all.
I would like to point out, side note, before we get talking serious stuff, that I appreciate that Edming is spelling my name different every time he types it. I appreciate that.
That's good. I like that. No, so in addition to all the other pieces to it, because I don't think the death of Superman has often been accused of being a gimmick, and I don't think that's a totally unfair criticism, although I don't know if it's entirely a fair one either, all things considered. That being said, the intention of the creators, and I'm in marketing is obviously a part of it, and I think it's totally Carlin's clearly playing marketing games if he's even trying to sync things with Lois and Clark on any level, even if it didn't work.
And imagine a world where you have cross-media synchronicity. I mean, who would think of such a thing? It's mind-blowing.
Well, I mean, it's called transmedia.
Come up with a name for that.
No, it's called transmedia. And all the Hollywood production companies, it's the rage right now.
Cinematic universe.
No. Transmedia is when you incorporate comics, movies, TV, video games, action figures. Everything you produce as media is part of a broad story.
Michael Allred was doing that with his Madman comics and his movies back in the 90s.
Yes.
G-Man from Hell, part of the continuity.
So the other side to this, which is interesting, is the fact that Carlin and Wheezy, Louise Simonson, bring this up, which is the fact that Carlin sees the death of Superman as a bit of a, and this is actually part of the thesis I'm going to bring up. I think Reese is going to kind of like this. He might hate it. He might like it. But the idea is this, which is that the death and return of Superman, especially the death part, is it's a bit of a commentary on the 90s itself. And the fact that, and the fact that Superman wasn't, his star was still a star, but that it was fading in the light of very violent superheroes like Wolverine, Deadpool, and Cable, and so on. And Carlin and I think Louise Simonson and the other, and Jurgens kind of were like, okay, well, let's just assume that Superman's always going to be there. He's the immortal man, as you just mentioned. Well, what if we make the readers, what if we undermine that? And make it so that readers can't take him for granted, and that maybe they need to treat him with a little bit more respect in light of the super violent characters. And when you read, especially the Return of Superman, you definitely get a lot of that commentary on violence and violent characters. And so, to tie this in, what I think is interesting is that I think that the Death and Return of Superman, through its 1,000 or so pages of all the connected stories, essentially has the same message ultimately, or one of the main messages as Kingdom Come, which is the addressing of the 90s and the addressing of the violent characters as opposed to the aspirational character that Superman represents. Mm-hmm. So I think it's interesting is that Kingdom Come may have Alex Ross and Mark Waid in one compact graphic novel addressing this issue, But the Death of Superman through the serialized format essentially does the exact same thing.
Well, and I think it's able to do it a little more. I'm not sure. The word that comes to mind is authentic, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. But because we get to see the story play out along Superman's supporting cast, because we get to see the reign of the Supermen, and how these 4 characters apply their own concepts to things, for good and ill. I think you get to see the implications of Superman in the modern age more clearly than you do in Kingdom Come.
I think it's more prescient of a criticism of what was going on in comics in the 90s. The 4 Supermen who return are sort of caricatures of the 90s edgy comic book. And even Superman, when he came back in the black armor with the mullet, was also sort of a caricature, sort of a criticism of what was going on aesthetically with comics. And it was trying to get us to
pick up
focus
a
on
gun.
something deeper. He does.
He picks up a gun. Yeah.
Big deal. Batman's done that dozens of times.
Yeah, he has to,
because started with a gun.
I need to point this out.
Pick up a gun because he's weak. He needs to be a force equalizer like Winchester's supposed to be.
So the point, I want to point this out, the fact that Superman and Batman and Jim Tooner brought up Wolverine, all superheroes are aspirational to a degree, but I need to make this point, and I'm trying to make it in a way that's the least provocational. But Superman embodies aspirational values and symbolizes aspirational concepts in ways that most superheroes do not. And I'll give you a couple of concrete examples.
Actually, I think you could drop the "ol" from it. While any hero can be aspirational, Superman is basically aspiration.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. But like, if we just take the fact
Superman
that
space Moses, for God's sake,
but Batman inspires fear, and he inspires some other things too. I'm saying there's more to Batman than fear. But Batman is in Gotham, in his story, he symbolizes fear for criminals. And although villains are afraid of Superman, Superman does not symbolize fear. He symbolizes the best that humanity could ever be. It's messianic, and it's so it's not just, I would say, Judaism. It's messianic, it's Christ-like, and that's why I think it's resonated so well with Christian America. He symbolized. Some people joke and call him Space Jesus, but it's kind of not inaccurate. So Superman being that is very, very important. And in Kingdom Come, what you have is the failure of the superhero because he turns his back, which is maybe something that I think rubs Reese very much the wrong way. Whereas the reason why we're deprived of the aspiration in Death and Return of Superman is because he sacrifices himself. So there's the tone of the work ends up absorbing the consequences of that. So you can say which one of them does it better. But like I said, ultimately, I think that essentially Death and Return of Superman is a much longer version of Kingdom Come.
And the only 2 of the 4 Supermen who went through the reign who survived as legacy characters were the 2 that had some aspirational element to them. Mm-hmm. Connor and John.
Superboy and John.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's and I just loved both those characters from the beginning. Like from the first issue they're introduced. Like that's what I was intrigued with. Was because I guess part of it was I knew that Superman was coming back, right? once you get that green cover one, I can't remember the Adventures of Superman, whatever it is, I can't remember the number on it right now. But once him and Pa Kent fight their way through hell, and I knew Superman's coming back. So these 2 guys, they're not even pretending they're Superman, but they're Steel is inspired in such a way that he's like reshaping his entire life around that. He's choosing to embody that kind of aspiration, that what inspired him he chooses to inspire. I thought that was really cool. And for Superboy, I was a 16-year-old kid, so I think I may have been a little younger than that time. But anyway, point being is I was pretty young, so seeing, the idea where he insists that he's Superman, you should call him Superman. He just got hatched a little early, but he's definitely so he's trying to take all these airs on himself and dealing with people's expectations and his expectations for himself, and fumbling through while trying to still do what he thinks is right. But what 16-year-old even knows what's right, because you're figuring it all out. So,
well,
Buck brings up
that grip.
Go ahead. I was going to say, compared to Steel, Steel tries to be Superman, and Connor just kind of assumes I am Superman and doesn't really have any of the moral upbringing because he just emerged from from the worst source possible.
Yeah, if only they had
from Cadmus. Yeah.
If only they had better security than none at all at Cadmus, and let the 5 little teenage boys just run roughshod over the top secret government project and break experiments out every 10 minutes. That got a little old after I think the third time it happened in this very story arc, and it was like they're gonna do nothing about this. No, the kids just broke out the experiment again. It was just like, good gosh.
Yeah.
That's
a fair criticism.
Look, the 90s was a different time. Our parents let us get away with more stuff than your parents did.
Bloody Cadmus. All right.
That's
so Buck brings up an excellent point. I want to highlight this in chat. Buck says, let's see here. Superman dies and is replaced by Steel, who has his ideals but not his power. Superboy, who has his legacy but is a rebellious teen, complete with leather jacket. Eradicator.
Is cool.
Eradicator, who has his power but is a violent warrior, and Cyborg Superman, who has most of the image but a Terminator-esque. Yes, I think that was intentionally brought to bear. The fact they all kind of have a piece of the elephant. But again, this is something that Louise Simonson brought up specifically, which is her experience previously to this was, of course, Death and Return of Phoenix with Chris Claremont, and so on. And so she was able to bring to the table the fact that she knew what you could do with a death story, which was not just the death of the character, but celebrating the life of the character and what that character meant to everyone else. And so because of that, a good chunk, and a chunk that I found myself really absorbed into myself, is how much impact an aspirational character like Superman has, and the fact that people only really stop to think about that when it's been taken away from them, and then they can kind of address how much Superman meant to them. And that's what Louis said. That's why some of the creators who made this story, in addition to the gimmicks and the marketing and all the rest of it, they wanted to make it so that Superman wasn't taken for granted. And they also wanted to do kind of what ended up, what they were able to do a little bit with Jean, which is comment on how much Superman meant to people. And much more so than Jean Grey, Superman has meant so much to the entire comic book industry because he was essentially the beginning of it. There's a lot going on, I think, more so in the funeral for a friend. I think is don't just read Death of Superman. If you're gonna, there's a lot to read, but if you read anything, read Death of Superman, because it's actually kind of a fun fight. But after that, Funeral for a Friend, I think, is probably the more important story to read because of how much thought that the creators put into memorializing the character, and because they have so long to do it, as opposed to like one episode where they kill Superman and bring him back real fast, or say no, this didn't happen with 149, because they were able to keep Superman dead for several months. They were able to take several months of time and flesh out what the absence of this character meant to not only the city, but actually a very small group of characters. What's actually quite surprising about Death and Return of Superman is not the grandness of its scope. It's actually how small the scope is. You can boil down a lot of the drama to a select circle of characters, and then radiates from there. But there's a select circle of characters who kind of were in the sort of, background civilians, essentially, but people who were important in Superman's life at the time, people that Byrne and Wolfman and so on had created, One thing that I wanted to bring up is the fact that people talk about the reign of the Supermen and they ignore the one who was the best of them all, which is Bibbo. Bibbo is the one who deserves the crown for actually taking on and becoming Superman. He saved the puppies, or he saved a puppy from drowning. He's the only one who does something like that, dives in the river with no powers at all and saves a puppy from drowning.
Well, Bibbo is superhumanly lucky.
So something else that came to my mind when Twitless mentioned the death of Jean Grey. This is also contextually around the same time frame as the death of Spock. Was another one that happened with, they killed Spock in one movie, they brought him back in another movie. So we were kind of primed for the switcheroo of they're not really dead. And I don't know how much that really resonated with people when the comic first came out. But I think it was still early enough where you could get away with that trick versus now, you kill a character, they're bringing him back like 2-3 issues later. Yeah. Because they can't afford to be fallow that long.
To be fair, even with Spock, they made that movie because Leonard Nimoy wanted to be off that forever, and they killed him off. And he said, "This was such a better movie than the first one. If it were all like this, I'd actually like to be in it." And so they dang it, and they threw in a thing at the end where they possibly had a key to bringing him back, and then they immediately bring him back, and that does undercut the wonderful ending of Star Trek 2. So yeah, it's nice to have some time to deal with it. It would have been better if they brought back Spock in Star Trek 5. Gave him some time off, and they had a key to bringing him back. But yeah, he's barely missed, and yeah. So I get what you're saying about the time.
He's still showing up as Spock in 2009. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, that didn't work.
But to be fair,
share my screen. I got
doing it. Yeah.
I got Bibbo. I got the real MVP of Reign of the Superman is Bibbo, who like I said, normal schlub, works at a bar, and but he's just like pals with Superman. And what I love is seeing how Superman inspires normal people to be better than they would normally be. There's a really good scene right around the funeral. That's a meta commentary. It's also a bit of a self-critique of their own gimmick, which is kind of interesting. But they have a guy who's like, get your t-shirts, get your black bags, and get your armbands, which they were selling those things, but then they're making fun of the fact that they're selling those things and making this all a spectacle. And Bibbo walks up, and Bibbo just kind of wants to wallop this guy for being so disrespectful. But instead, he thinks about, what would Superman do? And what he essentially does, and this is something Reese had brought up, which is good con, everybody wins. And some of the best Superman stories are where he's able to even like do something nice for the villain, essentially, even while stopping him. And so Bibbo basically buys all the guy's merchandise. And then because the guy's like, I gotta make a living. And Bibbo says, you're out. I buy all of it. And then he says, if you need work, come and work with me tomorrow. And then he's like, you're done. You're done doing this ghastly display because I bought all your stock. And so that was him essentially doing what he thought Superman would do, which was opposed to like just socking him in the face, which is unfortunately what a lot of people misunderstand superheroes to be, which is just the leveraging of power to enforce your own opinion for what you think is right, as opposed to what superheroes were meant to be, which is totally using violence for action purposes and so on, but also encouraging people to be better and reaching a hand and shaking people's hands who were fighting. And bringing together people, and even hey, you're a slimy person, but I'm gonna find a way to resolve this without necessarily just punching you in the face. And so seeing the fact that Superman can inspire this and inspire it, and this basically this bar guy, so much so that he leaps into the water to save a puppy that was going to be drowned, it's just sweet. And like I said,
and obviously
MVP
it's a puppy that looks like Crypto too. Don't forget.
Right. Oh yeah, he calls it Krypton. So yeah, that happens. But it's important to. Death and Return of Superman is, I think, is a difficult story sometimes to talk about because it gets flack, and it deserves flack for some of the things that it introduced into superhero parlance, which is the endless revolving door of characters dying and coming back. Max Landis does a really hilarious mini documentary that I'm sure many of us have seen, The Death and Return of Superman, where he kind of like puts this on blast and basically says this didn't kill Superman, it killed death in comics, essentially. And it killed people's investment afterwards, because everyone in America was like, "Ooh, Superman's dead," and then like a few months later, they were already essentially bringing him back, and it changed the industry forever. A lot of people see it as a very shallow gimmick. I think some of those criticisms are valid and deserved. But when you actually sit down and read the whole story, there's a lot going on here, and it's good comics in a lot of ways. And it's definitely better than Battle of the Atom I read by Bendis recently that almost made me want to quit reading comics. It was so bad. I'm reading Death and Return of Superman, and I'm like, I'm having fun with comics again. Heavens. Reese, you're muted.
No wonder nobody can hear me. So, the Battle of the Atom, what is that? I had not heard. I don't think I've heard of that.
Oh, I don't. You're gonna give me PTSD. It was a Yeah, it was it's a 50-year anniversary or something of the X-Men.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
It was terrible. Yeah. It was
the
worst thing I've ever read.
So, the other part of the thing too is you're talking about complaints with it. They fall along the same kind of lines as many of my complaints with Kingdom Come, right? Where it's if Kingdom Come existed with an exclusion, I couldn't hate it nearly as much as I do, but because it paved a path to destruction for the whole universe, I hate it desperately, and personally blame Mark Waid for it. But and I could see that, but as far as a complaint about death not meaning much in comics, but I think part of that is not to do with the death and return of Superman. I think it has more to do with people not letting Hal Jordan stay dead and not letting Barry Allen stay dead. They had perfectly serviceable deaths, and they should have left them there. And
yeah,
I don't think comics. And this is I'm a little jaded on here. And Hutch, tell me if I'm crazy, because you started reading in the Silver Age, but I really feel like comics were better for those characters moving on.
The difference here is that these are the same creators who killed him off, who planned to bring him back, and they explain that he was never really dead; he was only mostly dead. And they have a bellows, and he says he's got to come back for true love, and he does, and that's true lame. Love. He's not actually dead,
To blave,
which means to bluff. So. This is, that's different from, they do a really good job of killing off a lot of characters, and then like Barry Allen should have never been brought back. He had a wonderful send-off, and then all of a sudden he just emerges out of a time stream chasing a magic bullet or something, and and he's back, and it's like it made no sense. There's a lot of characters that get killed off, and we want them back because the way they were killed off was horrible, like Ted Kord. Or Elongated Man, quite frankly. A lot of them that just, their deaths don't even, Elongated Man, Mark Waid's death of him was actually rewritten by Dan DiDio. And it's like, so that it didn't make sense. And there's a lot of characters that get killed off, and we want them back. There's a lot of characters, though, that have been killed off in a wonderful story, and it's like, leave them dead, and they're still brought back, like Jason Todd, and Barry Allen, and a bunch of others. Then there's others who are like, Supergirl had been killed off wonderfully, and then she's erased from existence, and then they bring her back. So
Marvel
stayed
dead.
Don't want Jason Todd back. Yeah. He can go back to the dead.
The only thing you can't come back from is cancer. So because I'm actually
that's not true anymore.
Uncle Ben stays dead.
Marvel, I'm pretty sure Marvel is permo dead. I don't think they brought him back.
Oh no. The exception to that is Jane Foster.
Oh, you mean about cancer? Okay.
Yeah.
I was just talking about Death and Return of, the death of Captain Marvel, not Return.
We got to go one thing, Fizz. That's 100% wrong, but we can't get into it because that's not the topic of the show. Tune in
fighting
for
words.
a future show, and we will discuss the Plastic Man parody.
I'm gonna push back. I'm gonna push back on the characters who had great deaths kind of idea, because I think the idea of superheroes dying contradicts. Umberto Eco discusses this when he says essentially superheroes can't die because they're myths. And one thing that I would bring up that Louise and
I'll make sure to
Carlin,
I'll make sure to tell Cucullin that
is the fact that part of the typical mythic kind of we take it to the sort of Joseph Campbell level for mythic characters or fairy tale type characters, the journey to the underworld and return from it. And so I think the creators of the Death and Return of Superman kind of understood this story to be essentially that, which was taking your mythic character and fully pulling him through the mythic paces of he's got to go to the underworld and then return. So I see that following mythical models. And I would also add to that the fact that every generation kind of wants to see the superhero live and die, but then the generation that comes right afterwards wants to see him live again, because that's exactly what happened to Chris Claremont's X-Men the minute that Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld show up, because Chris Claremont was going to write them all off into the sunset because they were his kids for like 18 years. And then immediately Jim Lee and company show up and say, nope, we want them back so that we can have them. They're no longer your toys, old man. And Chris is, as bitter as he is about it, had to essentially say that is correct. They're not my toys. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting conversation, but it does, I think, reveal generational generational interaction.
What's really interesting is how you just said that. You said everybody wants to see a superhero live and die. And immediately my mind went to the line from Green Goblin in the first Spider-Man movie. The people love a hero, but the thing they love more is to see a hero fail, fall, die trying.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that everyone, because this is something I've picked up from Reese and a few other people that I've talked to who are old, but I'm well on my way there, which is the fact that when you enter comics, you want to see the character grow, mature, get married, and pass the torch on to the next generation, because that's what we do as people. The thing that we don't always understand when we're dealing with mythic characters, not normal characters, but mythical ones, is the fact that mythical characters constantly rejuvenate themselves, and that's kind of part of their appeal, which means the next generation is already rip roaring raring to go with, I want to see that character young for me, and then do the same thing. And so what you end up I think some of what we see in comics, because it's a serial narrative that's been going on for so long with same and similar characters, is we get to see the generational interaction and gaps and conflict. Whereas with Dickinson's characters did in fact stop because they stopped being published. Someone didn't take up, Nell from Curiosity Shop and bring her back. That was just Dickens's thing because Dickens owned it. The fact that superheroes are owned collectively, they're everybody's. They're no one person's toy. Means that the implications of that lead to, I think, what we see. That's my take.
I think the one Reese brought up is actually a good example. Going back to myth is Cuchulainn. With all the different clans and tribes in like Ireland, Scotland, and Wales at the time, which at one point were all just basically one group of people before they split off, you can actually see that there are more unique tales about Cuchulainn than like any other mythical figure, but his life still all fits within a certain timeline. So you have all these like what now you would consider like non-canon tales, but like you could pick a path of like one point to another with him, and you kind of have like this constant, like each generation coming up with the tales of the character that really fits to them.
if you look at the ancient Greek myths, you have a similar pattern with Heracles. Before the Athenians more or less codified the Greek mythology,
Yeah.
there were similar deal with Hercules.
Well, and I think part of the problem we come to too is the idea, like, you know, do we want superhero comics to be serious drama, or do we want them to be melodrama? Right? If we want a universe of drama, then you need to have people growing old and dying. If you want just melodrama, then you don't have to have issue to issue continuity. You know, do the Archie thing. Everything happens now, and you kind of keep themes from issue to issue to issue. But you know, the themes are as flexible as the stories, and everything kind of resets it once you close that page 24 and you look at the ads for next month. You know,
Echo says,
what do you have to choose?
Echo essentially says that's what happens anyway to superhero stories because of that. He says something's got to give, and it's the concept of time. Time dies in superhero stories.
But I mean, what do you have to choose between drama and melodrama?
Exactly.
Because you could have drama seeded into the melodrama.
Because if you don't, because the where I'm choosing to separate those concepts is that, like, Superman's death is meaningless. Superman's not a good example. Let me back up, because Superman is you know, is that, you know, going to the underworld, kind of return from the underworld kind of a story. But the like more like Barry Allen's death is meaningless if it just undoes it. Steve, actually a really good example of what I'm trying to get at. One of my big problems with the return of Jason Todd, when you find out that Jason Todd has really always been back alive, right? Like, he was dead for 6 days, and then he was thrown in the Lazarus pit, and everything was great.
Superboy Prime punched the universe until time altered.
Well, and then
I'm glad you. Okay, so to bring it back to Death and Return of Superman, I actually felt the exact same way when Cyborg Superman breaks in, steals Doomsday's corpse, and at the end of that very issue, Doomsday opens his eyes and starts laughing, and I'm like, so you mean to tell me that not only is Superman back, but Doomsday's back? And Doomsday's only been dead for the same amount of time as Superman's been dead, which is like 3 months or something. And so to me, or like under a year, I don't know how much time in this continuity.
I can't recall.
It's like it can't be more than a year. It feels like it's a matter of months. And so the fact that it completely undermines the final cataclysmic punch. That punch is a good punch, and and some people say that the final issue of the fight, because I do want to talk about the fight a little bit, because it's a really good thing to talk about, but it's a moment. These characters are like, they brawl and they take each other down, and then it's like, no, they're both alive within a couple weeks, and it's like, it just deflates all of the buildup that you had there, which is it's just irritating. So yeah, for the reason that you just said, which is like it starts to detract from the investment that you had for something that you invested yourself in. One thing, passing this on to creators out there who may be listening, don't punish your readers for investing in the story you sold them.
Right, and that gets back to what I was trying to get at with talking about Jason Todd's death and the specter of Jason Todd, the tragedy of his death, of his the potential that he had, if the hope that he could have been, and how his own selfishness, his own vices, his own recklessness led to his death, right? That was such a defining aspect of the person that Tim Drake grew to be, right? Was that everything Tim Drake did was out of his appreciation for Batman, for his mission, for his belief in justice, for his observed.
So
grief.
I don't want to cut you off, but we are steering into Jason Todd territory.
I just want to use that as a point to this topic. I'm wrapping it up. Trust me.
Right.
So, So when Jason Todd came back, I just about signed off. I was just like, you're just pissing all over, one of my favorite characters. You're making all of his suffering meaningless. It's a nothing, and you're doing it to give us a bargain basement Tommy Monaghan when we already had Tommy Monaghan. I'm done. Right.
I'm less bothered by bringing him back. I'm more bothered by what you said and how it was like he wasn't even dead for 10 minutes. Because then it's like, well, he never was really dead. So then all the investment I put into that meant nothing. That's again, that's where you were punished for that investment.
Right.
Don't do that to your audience. If you're gonna bring him back, make it like they brought Phoenix back. There are so many ways to do this, but if you do it in a way that undercuts everything that people invested into that moment, you are doing it wrong. That's how I feel on that. Before we get too much further, Hutch had something he wanted to say about Bibbo. I want to hear what Hutch had to say about Bibbo before go too far.
Okay, diverting quite a bit off the topic we've been into. The scene where Bibbo kneels in his bar. He closes it up and he kneels and prays to God about his best friend being dead. Was really touching, and that was the issue of Action Comics that I wrote a letter about, and I won the Baldy Award for that issue.
Oh, really?
And I got the silver encased Death of Superman along with a note from Mike Carlin. I imagine everybody who got a Baldy Award during the Death of Superman storyline got one of those. So wow. That was really cool. It was very well merchandised, and we were talking about the merchandise and the scene where Bibbo, gets after the guy for merchandise, but it's much more gruesome in universe to have a bleeding Superman logo. It's like that. I thought that was tasteless when DC was selling them, but then in universe, would somebody ever want to sell that when this is really how Superman was beaten to death, on the streets of Metropolis?
What was in your letter?
Mainly I remember that they edited out one of my comments, but I talked about, I talked about the hints that Superman and Lois were sleeping together, and I did not approve of it just because of the nature of the book at the time. It was still an all family audience, and it was the early 90s. It's different, but it's like I just saw the Crypto cartoon, the one with The Rock doing Crypto, and it talked about Lois sleeping over, and I'm like, this is for kids. Wait, what is this? It's like, who is this movie for? But the comic book back at the time, I was like, I was commenting about that was the issue where I want to say Ma Kent was calling Lois and was concerned about her, and it's like, your kid is dead and you're comforting me, and that was the funeral for a friend. It was just everybody's reactions, everybody's musing about Superman and what he meant to them, and it ends with Bibbo kneeling. I don't know if you remember that. So rare moment of.
Doesn't he do doesn't he do the Catholic all hair?
He does. He does. Yeah.
He does the Mary, full of grace. And then he talks to God. And so it's
called a Hail Mary.
Is the Hail Mary? Okay.
Yeah. For a guy who was first entered, he was first introduced in a kidnapping storyline as kind of an underworld figure who liked Superman, wanted to buy him a beer. And they brought him back and toned him down quite a bit and made him kind of, a decent guy, because before it was kind of like he was in organized crime, so they were really pushing it. And then he won the lottery and then bought the Ace of Clubs or whatever it's called. And so anyway, I got the Baldy Award. So that was a rare moment for me. I sold that issue, by the way, a long time ago, because that was when the 90s, all the bagging and boarding and everything arrives bagged and boarded, and everybody grabs 10 copies and bags and boards them. It's like, that's all going to be worthless because everybody has it and everybody's bagging them all. So it was still part of the 90s, even though it was criticizing the 90s. That's all from me. Go ahead.
So I would like to spend some time talking about, we talked a little bit about this. in terms of general themes, but where do you each feel looking back over the last 30 years? Do you think that? Do you agree that the death of Superman has been detrimental to American superhero comics overall, or do you think that the results have been better than not?
Can I go first?
Yes.
I've been quiet for a while. So, as far as comics goes, like I say, this was a planned death and bring back. It's different from how I feel about the death of Ice in Justice League, the death of, Sue, and the death of Elongated Man, the death of Ted Kord. A lot of characters that I don't mind them being brought back because it was an editorial. It's like those editors who killed him off didn't know what they're doing. And then there's the characters that we love to see. And by the way, Barry Allen's death in Crisis was amazing, but when after there's a post-crisis memory of how Barry died, which was revised in Secret Origins, of how he died, that he was chasing a what do they call that particle that goes
Tachyon.
back in time.
Tachyon.
He's chasing a tachyon and going back through his life, and he catches it, and it turns him into energy, and he re-enters the universe and turns into the lightning that gave him his powers. And it shows. So he's like, he's watching himself racing off, having gotten the superpowers, and he realizes he's living his life in an eternal loop, always reliving his life over again, which is what he wanted to do. He always wanted to live his life over again. He would. And I thought that is so wonderful. I just love the idea that he's living his life over and over again. And then they bring him back, and it's like, you ruined this beautiful story, and you didn't need to bring him back. I don't know why they brought Barry Allen back, because Wally West was doing such a great job, and then Wally West was kind of superfluous when they redid the universe, and Wally West was oddly enough killed off in a wonderful story by Mark Waid, although he wasn't totally killed off because they reintroduced him again, but there was a issue 150 or 250 or whatever it was where he actually sacrifices his life, and then it shows him in the lightning running with all the dead super speedsters. Like every time there's a lightning flash, you see all the speedsters running along inside it, and it's like, that was really cool too. And then they brought him back. It's like, don't do a good story where you kill somebody off and bring him back. But go ahead, Larry.
So there's a term in professional wrestling called hot-shotting, where you do something dynamic, flashy to bump up the energy of the promotion. So Death of Superman was an example of early hot-shotting in comic books. But back then, they didn't hot-shot so tightly together. So at the time, it didn't cause a problem. But it was the first domino, and now comics have to keep hot-shotting each other once a quarter to keep the wheels running. So the fact that it was a sugar high, and they don't know how to have actual good energy in the comics to keep the comics going. But that's not Death of Superman's fault. That's not, the reign of Superman's fault.
So I want to hit on that just a little bit. So when I was getting into comics back in this time, a little before, they had those company-wide events, right? But if you didn't read the crossover, you just saw how it bled into the stories you were reading. They talk about this big event happened in Metropolis, or this big event happened, or whatever it was. They'd have hints of it, so you get hints of these things happening in other books. But if you didn't have the extra scratch to go buy those books, or if they didn't come to your mini mart or whatever, you might have wanted it, but you weren't losing sleep over it, and you didn't feel like you were getting cheated out of the book you were reading right there, right? And I think that part of what you reflect on is that I feel like that we're missing those where there's, or at least have been over the last several years, missing that sense of value in the book you're holding in your hand right now. It's always something like, it's attached to this thing, or it's attached to this thing, and you're not getting the fullest of experience of what you have right there. And I wonder
Sorry. That's actually what I was thinking about watching the promo for the new Blue Beetle movie. All these people were like, well, what does it matter? Flash is resetting the universe. This is just going to be stupid. It won't even matter. And it's like, since when did we, here's a superhero movie. Just enjoy it for, it doesn't have to tie into anything else. All the movies that we enjoyed up till the 2000s were just standalone movies. And if there was never another one, then so be it. It was still just enjoyable as is. And I was thinking, it's kind of like you're talking about that. It's like, it doesn't have to tie into tons of other things. It should be enjoyed as it is.
It's a fair criticism. I will add to that or contextualize, and this connects to connect it to Death and Return of Superman.
Mm-hmm.
It's Death and Return of Superman. When you read it, like I said, I'm pretty sure it's in a lot of ways it's good comics, but the gimmick part of it, and part of the gimmick they did, I don't know if we've touched on this, is they canceled solicitations for Superman books because for at least the next cycle. And they had to do that because comic book stores get the solicitations, 3 months in advance, however often they get it. Mm-hmm. And the idea is the fact that if you say Death of Superman and the solicitations already say Return of Superman, then you've already spoiled the ending. No one will believe it. And so Carlin got them to actually, and he said that this actually had the side benefit of it. They actually got to take a couple weeks off a little bit, gave them a mini vacation, because they canceled solicitations for Superman. It was a very brief one, but it was enough to essentially sell. I don't know if serious comic book readers really thought the Superman was ever gonna really die and never come back. But the fact that they canceled solicitations for even just a little bit made people go, "Oh, this is something that is there's more to it. It's something that they're committing to more than not at all." And that helped, I think, feed the media frenzy at the time, which was they killed Superman, he's gone. And then to have him turn back, because I remember just asking my mom about this, because my mom was not really a comic book reader, but she was, and part of what you can do to kind of help flesh out the zeitgeist at the time is ask comic book people like who were reading Superman at the time. Did you think so? I'll ask Ketchen in just a second. When this happened, what was your appreciation of Superman? How long did you think was he going to stay dead? But then you also ask just random people who didn't read comics. And I remember when I asked my mom recently about it, she said, "Oh yeah, it was all over the news. They killed Superman." And then when they brought him back, it was just kind of like, really? So it was just that impact, that arc of going through, doing all this hype for such an important character, only to turn around and, oh yeah, he's back in like 3 months or whatever. Or he's on the road to being back. And then it really did deflate, and it kind of in the mind of the public, it was like, fool me once, shame on me, but like I'm never gonna believe you again. And so that had an impact. It had an impact on the industry as a whole, and the industry that saw how much money Death and Return of Superman, it sold like 2 million copies. It was crazy. It sold and so everyone else was like, well, obviously, because the industry runs on trends, we got to start doing similar things. But then because they'd already done it once and kind of like gone through that deflation, no one else was going to buy into it happening for any other character. And the consequences of that were negative for the industry. I think that I think that's fairly well recognized. And I think it's why people actually look at Death and Return of Superman often with very negative glasses, when in fact the story is, I think, pretty good. But the campaign that they ran obviously had very negative. So we're left with a very interesting puzzle, because I think it's a pretty good comic. I think it's a pretty good story. I think that the creators had a vision and it works pretty well, and they had a commentary. So there's things going on, but the gimmicks they ended up employing hurt the industry. So that can't be, I think, glossed over. We have to confront that and say, well, yeah, it did. So
here's the question. If we didn't do Death and Return of Superman, do you think Heroes Reborn would have actually worked?
What was that? The Marvel?
That was Marvel when they took Captain America, Iron Man, Hulk, the Avengers, and the Fantastic Four and put them in a pocket dimension.
That's post Onslaught, I'm pretty sure.
Right.
Yeah.
That's post Onslaught. But what I'm saying is, do you think if DC hadn't, went all in on Death of Superman, if this could have worked when Marvel did it?
I mean,
because it kind of worked when they did it with Batman and they broke his back a little bit. And I don't remember what the next big one was, but I think it was like one more, and then the whole Heroes Reborn thing.
Yeah, it was Emerald Twilight, and over in Marvel they had the Age of Apocalypse and Heroes Reborn kind of at the same time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it kept getting cheaper and cheaper because Nightfall was great. It was like the Death of Superman was to talk about the Image comics and that sort of stuff. Nightfall was, everybody says Batman should kill his enemies. Well, we're going to introduce a guy who's got all this armor and he actually kills bad guys and he's brutal and he doesn't have any of the character of Batman. And that was really good, except that they said that actually sales started really plummeting because people hated it so much. And it's like, well, no, we're just making a point. Batman will come back. And they brought him back as quick as they could. And then Emerald Twilight was kind of like where they started getting really cheap. That was hastily done. They actually scrapped the original plan for 48 through 50, did it at the last minute. It was really bad. And I don't blame the writer. He was given the assignment at the last minute and had one issue to turn Hal from a nice guy into, I'm going to go kill everybody I know, and it's like, that was crazy. It was terribly done. And then they changed Wonder Woman and had a different woman take over as Wonder Woman. They killed off Green Arrow.
Artemis,
killed off Green Arrow. Guy Gardner became Warrior. All these things are kind of like more and more stunty and less meaningful.
Well, speaking of the stunt, though, Hutch, since you were reading and much more in the scene at the time, when they started pulling this, I'd love to hear about what you thought as a reader. What did your shop owner think as well when they canceled solicitations? Like, how seriously were they taking this gimmick? Did they just go, "Oh, it's all just a big stunt"? What was the pulse there?
Back then I didn't have a shop. I was actually buying them off the rack. But the that and how great it was to actually buy them off the rack.
I know, right?
Still in college and getting them at the grocery store, but or I think I actually had them delivered by mail back then. But so I wasn't as privy to the chatter, but I knew that it was gonna. I knew that Superman would be coming back. I liked that they were doing a drawn out story, but I never had any doubt that it's like Steel and this kid and the Eradicator and the Cyborg. It's like this isn't going to be forever. I knew that. So I don't know that anybody who's like, I can't believe they brought him back. It's like, oh, come on. You knew that this was a planned story.
So I'm glad you said that, because I've read scholarship that essentially says exactly what you said, which is no one seriously bought that he was going to be dead, especially readers. But when they did cancel the solicitations, it did give some people pause as to that they were doing something, they were committing to it on a certain level. So like there's because Carlin says like, oh, like, when we cancel solicitations, people are like, oh, really, you're doing that? So like there was some level of that going on. So it's just interesting to just hear those perspectives.
This was right around the same time. 1991 was when they did the Armageddon 2001, and that was really wonderful. And then that summer, all of a sudden, they said that it leaked out that the Monarch was going to be Captain Atom, and they changed it at the last minute because it leaked. And I'm like, how did it leak? There was no internet. Who knew this? I didn't know this, and that was very
con.
Yeah. But how big is amongst the readership? How did everybody know? I didn't know. It's odd, that they went and changed it at the last minute because of that. So the stuff like that, like the, they canceled solicitations. I wasn't hanging around a comic shop at the time, so I couldn't tell you if would I have known about the Captain Atom thing if I'd been hanging out in the comic shop. I don't know what the general people knew, but most part, we didn't know that kind of stuff. And the only other thing I really have to say about the death of, well, I've got two things to say about the death of Superman. One is I never really liked Doomsday. I didn't hate him, but it's like for the death of Superman, I kind of want Lex Luthor to have done it.
Oh, let's talk.
Or
Okay,
let's talk. Somebody.
Let's talk Doomsday. Jurgens actually says why he chose that. So this is great segue, and then let's talk about the panel about Doomsday. So thank you, Hutch, for that perfect segue. Sure. Jurgens said this again. We can disagree or agree with him. Jurgens said that most of the time when Superman fought villains, he fought a lot. He said there was a lot of talking. Lex, there's a lot of talking. Brainiac, there's a lot of talking. You have these intellectual, heady villains. Their plots are very complicated. Their goals are very complicated. And so part of what Jurgens wanted to do, he said, I wanted to do something very different from that. And I wanted it to just be a big old fight, and not have a character trying to do something crazy intellectual. I just wanted it to be, and so that was Jurgens' take on that. I think that Doomsday, I'm kind of neutral, and I'll say why. For this comic and at this time and for what is going on in the story, which is again commentary on violence, commentary on ultraviolence, Superman, losing Superman to ultraviolence, that sort of thing. Having a character embody those traits, I think fits. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is that Doomsday is great for one thing, which is being a sheer representation of violence and having Superman basically resist just the metaphor. Doomsday is. I'm a metaphor for intense violence. That's his only motivation, is to be violent. There is no plan. There is no plot. I represent violence. And there is something kind of terrifying and monstrous about that. There is no speaking with him. There's no negotiation with him. You cannot. It's like in the recent Puss in Boots movie, where he's like, "I'm death straight up. I'm just death," and that's kind of what Doomsday is. He's violence and death, and he's personified in those things. And when he's wrecking his way through the Justice League, and they're just getting destroyed. You actually start to really feel the stakes, which in many superhero stories, with Superman involved especially, it's like, Superman's just gonna, snap his fingers and just, fix this with his superpowers, right? And then you have this character who Superman can't reason with him. Superman can barely keep up with him through most of it. He's a sheer personification of violence, death, and terror. And he's very effective at that. What I will say is this: Doomsday, I feel, is very, as he is in the comics, especially in his first appearance and so on, is very much a one-note character. He's a tool. He's less of a character and more of just a tool. He's a tool
to get force of nature.
Yeah. Well, I would say he's less than that, because a force of nature can kind of come back. What's Doomsday going to do? Just come back and kill Superman more? There's nothing left for him to do.
Yeah, that's pretty much. He's just the returning flood. That's all he is. That's what he is when he comes back. Is just the returning flood.
But he's not, though, because the second time he comes back, they can't just repeat. He's so one note that the next time he shows up, the thing they end up doing with him is just Superman essentially beating him and going, "Well, you're never going to do that to me again." And there's there's nothing. There's nothing left for Doomsday to do. So I'll say that in terms of making Doomsday a character, Justice League Unlimited did actually the better job of making him a character that had something that you could work with, which was being a weapon created by Cadmus that had been brainwashed from his very inception to hate Superman. There was something there that you could play with. In the comics, he's just a metaphor, and the minute that he's a tool, and the minute that the hammer is done hitting the nail, it's like a one-use hammer, and you can't really hit the nail again, because then you're just doing the exact same thing. So any follow-up story with him loses any real purpose or point or investment.
Well, and I want to add to that how because of this, and here's the thing, Doomsday does not kill Superman by using kryptonite on him. He doesn't take away his powers and figure out some special way to suck him into a black hole or something, right? He ends up becoming known as the thing that was able to beat Superman to death physically, right? He is the only thing in the universe that can stand toe-to-toe with him like that. And as such, he goes down in history as the thing that killed Superman. We just talked about all the times Superman has died in the past. And yet Doomsday gets this title as the Superman killer for all time, right? So
It's
much
the only thing he is. He's got nothing else to him.
This is one of the negative things I think we're left with, is how everybody and their mother now wants a shot at using Doomsday and trying to recreate this story again and again and again, right?
He doesn't really get used much. And whenever he does, like I said, they can't use him to do the one thing he did.
I'm talking about reboots where they redo the story.
They,
Zack Snyder has to say,
you
know what? I'm gonna shove Doomsday into my Batman.
That's film.
Movie,
In the comics, when they reboot him, they end up having to do weird things with him. Like once they did a virus thing. It was the New 52. It's a virus, and he makes everybody into a mini version.
I'm talking about when you transfer it into other media. Everybody who says, "Oh, I gotta use Doomsday." And now we just get the same story over and over and over.
Yeah, but I mean,
there's a real easy
just
fix for that, man.
The story.
Yeah,
stop going to the movies.
That's just what Larry said. That's transmedia.
It has been in the cartoons. It has been in Smallville. Like I talked before the stream about how Smallville devoted an entire season to this idea, and they made it very clear Doomsday is coming, and we were all on the edge of our seats. I'm like, oh my gosh, that means they're gonna kill off Clark even before he's Superman, right? And then they get to the end and they completely subvert it and just throw that entire concept out the window. And we're like, did they just do the death of Superman without actually killing off Superman?
Well, it's the point. Yeah. Go ahead.
I want to segue in here for a moment because number one, Doomsday is a retcon of Superman's origin because he's also Kryptonian, but in the same way that Superman's from Earth. So that's a problem with Doomsday as a character because they can't stand on his own 2 feet. And he came from a more edgy, violent time on Krypton, and then he just got sent into space, and he came back and came to kill Superman. It wasn't a good idea.
They didn't. I don't think they when they made him. I don't think they had that fleshed out yet. They end up bringing that in later. When they first bring him in, he's meant to be a character with essentially no origin. They kind of like fill in the dots later, which makes him even more of a metaphor. Essentially, he's just death. He just showed up on Earth. We don't even know why.
He's a parallel story to Superman, though, the way they retcon it, and it retcons Superman's story because again, Superman being the last survivor of Krypton. ... And there's the girl one ... And there's the alternate reality girl one ... And that clone we made.
So
and
you're
telling me, there's Doomsday.
So you're saying instead of Doomsday, they should have just had Lobo, the main man.
No.
I think I would prefer that.
Lobo could have worked. Lobo could have worked.
Hard disagree.
In fact, Max Landis did that in his Superman comic that he did.
Oh, the one he pitches.
He actually did the comic. It was an 8-issue comic run.
Oh, okay. I disagree. I like Doomsday for what he is. Retconning him to be Kryptonian, meh. I don't really care necessarily for that. Him being a mysterious thing that just showed up and there's no explanation for it's actually kind of like makes him scary.
It was actually my problem. I didn't like. I eventually, after reading it, getting old enough to go back, and then I didn't even like Doomsday the first time.
Sure. Take him or leave him.
I like the origin, except that it's Krypton. I wish he was from somewhere else, any other planet. It's like characters like Mongol don't have to be Kryptonian to be at Superman's
I like Mongol.
level. Yeah, I'm just saying, why not have him be from some other planet besides Krypton?
Well, of course, this is part of the problem.
That's overbaking. That's overbaking your story, which is something comics do all the time. They overcook it.
It's kind of the problem with Superman.
You could have said he was from the edge of the universe at the time, and that would have been believable.
Would have worked. It would have worked just fine. But they had to overcook it because everything's got to be connected.
Yeah.
Don't overcook your stories, kids. Word to the wise. Reese, what did you think of Doomsday?
I guess I was fine with Doomsday in the story. I understand, like, he should have just been dead. I mean, that's the thing is, like,
I agree.
Him surviving, like, it's sort of like
it's totally retarded.
Okay, so Morpheus, right? No, it's Orpheus. He goes in, like, just like, let's reimagine the myth. Like, so he goes in, he takes his wife back, they make it out, he's defeated Hades, and Hades says, "Oh, I'll get you next time," right? What? Yeah, it's that kind of, I mean, of course, that's not the way the Orpheus legend goes, right, and it shouldn't. But I mean, if you were going to do it the full heroic story, and it's not about the inevitability of loss, if you're just doing the full heroic story, and then all of a sudden you get the bad guy just to show up and I mean, it's kind of takes some of the punch out of it, I think.
I mean, but
and what do you do with it? What do you do with it? I mean, there was
crazy chicks later, so
there was
it's still a tragic story.
Yeah, they had Doomsday come back one time, and he was intelligent, and he was being used as a weapon by Cyborg Superman at one point too, and later on, and it's just sort of like.
He also had the Joker virus. He got the Joker virus where he's a Jokerized Doomsday.
Oh gosh, he was an effective one use hammer. In case of kill Superman, break glass, use this hammer, hit the nail on the head, and he hits the nail right on the head. The epic showdown. I want to bring this up. I'm going to pull this up because what they ended up doing.
I got it while you're doing that. Neo calls me out in the chat. He says, "I was going to say that's not the ending I remember."
That was the point.
Yeah, that was what I was going for.
My nickname for my wife is Eurydice. Because she always walks behind me, and I have no idea if she's still there or if she has dropped behind to do something and look at something. I honestly call her Eurydice a lot.
That's great.
Just
I love that.
Stay out of Hades. Just do yourself a favor.
Don't look back.
Yeah. While Twitless is pulling up whatever that is he's looking for, I just have to say, the thing that bothers me about Doomsday is that Superman has fought tougher things, and it's like Superman never goes at super speed, grabs him in the small of the back and lifts him out of space. It's like, why isn't he getting him out of Metropolis, and just take him into orbit or something and throw him at the sun.
Why did Zack Snyder do that with Zod?
Oh.
Right.
Well, no, that's interesting. You bring that up. I'm going to pull something up here real quick.
Oh gosh, it's Superman grabbing him by the small.
All right, I got.
Twitless
I've got my thing. So
Twitless has his thing.
Okay, so one thing I want to point out. This is the final fight. The entire issue. It's something that when we read comics, sometimes we miss. But the entire issue is splash pages. Every single page is a one-page splash. And some people, I think, criticize this. Oh, it's just a gimmick, and it kind of is. But I want to point out the fact that that's what I was going to say. I want to push back against them just saying it's a gimmick, because as the finale of this fight, I think it's a brilliant decision, because it's something very different. It is something very intentional, and it's basically this whole issue is going to be just one punch after the next, just page after page of just full page images, and it's really intense. Yeah, it's super intense, and it's just page after page after page of just single splashes. And I'm like, you obviously you wouldn't want to do this for the whole series, but the fact that they did this for one issue, and the issue they chose was the one where it's the final round, and these two titans are going to be, they're going at it. One of them's not coming out of this. I like that setup. I do agree with Hutch that my initial thought, of course, and there's probably ways to there's always ways to write around this. It would have been nice if they had addressed Superman's usual way of dealing with problems of this type, which is Phantom Zone. You know, it's usually just, there's a problem I can't solve with physical strength. I've got this thing that puts you in a dimension where you cannot hurt and you cannot be hurt. Goodbye. It's the imprisonment, option. And the fact that it wasn't even mentioned, they could have zapped him with it. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe Doomsday got zapped into the Phantom Zone. Maybe comes back out. It's like, oh, he's so unstoppable.
I would have liked that if he just like broke out of the Phantom Zone. That would have been great.
Yeah, that would have.
I would have respected the character more too.
They should have done that, because it would have been Superman trying to use other options. B, it would have been scary as hell to have a character that's so unstoppable he broke out of the Phantom Zone. So sorry.
And C, it might have actually left opportunity for a rift where other things could sneak out in later issues that the like replacement Superman had to deal with.
That's fair. That's fair. So
yeah,
Jurgens,
like,
you should have called me back in when I was, yeah, back when I was like 4 and I didn't have this idea. But that being said, this final battle, which again, splash after splash after splash, it hits hard and it hits really well, and I do think it is a very epic battle. And it's exactly what Jurgens was envisioning for what he wanted this story to be different in terms of the normal Superman conflicts. So, like I said, mileage will vary. Some people like this more than others. I showed this to my students. They thought I showed them the death story. I didn't show them Funeral for a Friend. They thought they were much more resistant and thought it was very gimmicky. So they didn't respond as well to it. But
it's very memorable, right? Like I can think of another really good example in comics that does something similar. And like anybody who reads manga is familiar with like the legendary 7-page Muda from JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, where he's literally just punching a guy, and not all of them are full splash, but sometimes it's just split in half. It's almost like just full pages of him punching this dude for 7 pages straight. And it like resonates and just sits in your memory for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and this issue resonates kind of like an action manga does, and I will say that is a parallel that I think is very fair to draw here, and it works. I like it. What Hutch? What did you think of this one? Did you think this one was gimmicky, or did you think it was
this final issue was?
Yeah.
I mean, it's awesome. I'm just, I'm like Superman's smarter than this. He'd go get a steel cable and go around him really fast and tie him up, and his muscles are no good. And because he was originally confined by being in a straitjacket, it's like, do you remember how he beats up the Justice League with only one arm free?
Right.
And yeah, although I remember he was like, wasn't he like slamming Ted Kord's head in a car door and Ted Kord lived? It's like, how strong is Doomsday? But
that's the vagaries of superhero physics. Those were not steel cables, by the way. That was like space out. That was space.
His fists.
Space alien alloy of some kind.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. I'm just saying, Superman should be using his brains, and punching against punching doesn't interest me. It's for the same reason I don't watch, boxing. I don't know. I mean, this is still a very well told, dramatic story. I get it. It's just, I like.
I get you. I think having Superman have.
All right, so let me give you the answer then, because you brought it up. I totally forgot. In Smallville season 11, I got it up here. They actually did this. I forget. This was the comic where they messed up their first chance at using Doomsday, so they tried to use him again. And lo and behold, Superman does in fact go and take him into space and push him into the sun.
But now that I know he's Kryptonian, that's no good to throw him into a yellow sun. I know, that is
the weird part. Especially, and even Superman then finds himself in danger of being sucked into the sun. And I'm like, wait, aren't they powered by the sun?
Grant Morrison established in All-Star Superman that Superman can in fact overdose on sun, so it is possible.
But he also is the one who had his future Fortress of Solitude is in the sun.
I can't even express how much I hate that comic.
It should be your favorite. It's nothing but mythic interpretations of the character.
No, it's
you talking All-Star Superman is the one you hate?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Save it for another stream. Save it for another stream.
Okay.
Here all night. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Remember, we're planning a How Grant Morrison Ruined Comics stream.
No, actually, I changed my mind. I want to do Bendis next. Bendis almost killed my love of comics the other day.
I think that's fair.
Anyway, I have to say, before this show ends, I have to say the real problem I have is nothing to do with the comic. I'm not crazy about Doomsday, but the real problem of the success, the fantastic success of this story, and the story all told, the death and the return and the reign of the Superman and all that, that was good. It took a long time to play out. It had its reasons for doing it. It was dramatic. It revealed things. It had a point it was making. None of that is, ever since that happened, all the people in Hollywood want to do is Death of Superman. It's like, we're going to have a movie and it's going to be Death of Superman. And we want Kevin Smith to write it. And then it's like, you got 90 minutes to 2 hours, maybe 3, to try to pull this all off. And then when they finally did Superman Returns in the 2000s, they have to throw in something there of him dying from the fall and going to the hospital. Oh no, Superman's dead. Oh no, he's not. It's just, they have to do Death of Superman. And when they did Man of Steel, the very next movie is Death of Superman. It's like, he hasn't rescued one kitten. He hasn't established that people love him yet,
right?
Except that you're told that people love him, but we don't see that. Okay.
So I'm going to stop you there just because.
Go ahead.
I want to mostly because I want to stick to the more to the comics than to the film adaptation.
I get that, but
I will acknowledge the fact that I think this is the point you're making that I very much agree with, which is Louise Simonson, for example, when she's writing stories, and she specifically brought up the fact that, we're doing this because we want to show how much Superman meant to people. So I'm going to spend issue after issue after issue, character after character after character, living through a life without Superman and dealing with these consequences. So the point that you're bringing up there, Hutch, is the fact that in 90 minutes, they want, and this is one of my problems with adaptations as a whole, is they can't bring to bear the 1,000. If you buy the omnibus of Death and Return of Superman, it's a doorstop. It's like 1,000 pages. It is a massive tome. So you don't just get it's not just a massive tome. The death part of Superman is the minority of the story. It's a good part, and I disagree with Hutch slightly in the sense that I like having Superman have a brawl beatdown once in a while. It was cool to do it, as a point.
Yeah,
of
I agree with that.
So I do like that, although I do understand that for some people it wouldn't be as interesting as having him use his head more. I do wish he had used his head a little more and they had just written around that and gotten back to the punching.
Yeah, like it just didn't matter. It's like this thing seems
like
a dumb beast, but it actually isn't that stupid and you can't outthink it.
That would have worked. To Hutch's point, I do agree with that. But at the end of the day, having him have to solve a problem just with his fists is different. And I do like that. But the point I very much agree with is the fact that oftentimes people miss what makes the story work, and they head straight for the gimmicks, or they head straight for the parts that, we just got to do the death of Superman. And it's like, well, the death of Superman was actually not, as we all have been discussing, the death of Superman was actually not what wasn't what made us all appreciate the whole story. It's the funeral for a friend. It's the fact that Reign of the Superman, which some people do, it's people like to meme on it and clown on it because, oh, look at these crazy lunatics and they're all stupid or whatever. But going back and reading how each one of these Reign of Superman pretenders to the throne has like one part of what makes Superman Superman, and because they have one part and really only one part, they're lacking. And it makes you miss Superman all the more because he was all of the things. He was super powerful. He was, super threatening in a sense, but he was also very stoic in a sense. He was also very charming in a sense. He unified all of the good qualities that the reign of the Supermen had, and he was better than they were at all of them. And so having that storyline play out, and not just having it play out for 10 minutes, but having 2, 3, 4 issues devoted to these characters so that you could see, here's Steel, and here's how he embodies a core aspect of Superman, but here is the things that he's missing. He's trying his best. He's probably in terms of the spirit of the character, I think he's the closest.
Oh, he's my favorite because he has the part of Superman that I like the most about Superman.
Yeah. The others have like parts that are, much less incomplete, make them much less incomplete. You have Connor, who's got like, charm, but he has none of the parenting. He was not raised in Midwest Kansas, and so he has none of the Midwestern values. He's a very modern 90s kid, which makes him really obnoxious. And then you have Eradicator, who has all of the. I'm just saying it's in the book. You have Eradicator. Eradicator is all of the righteousness of Superman, but with no compassion. It's nothing but I will destroy crime, and if that means I have to crush the hands of every single safe cracker in Metropolis, that's what he does. That he cracks it, he destroys a guy's bones, he kills people. But he's got the righteousness. And then you've got the Cyborg Superman's just a bloody traitor, so he barely counts. He's got the look partly down, apart from the skull robot face. But they all represent a part of Superman. But you can only get that from issues, an investment of story. And sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but to reinforce Hutch's point, Hollywood just takes they gloss over, they pick out they cherry pick a couple parts and then try to run with it over and over again without seeing what actually made it tick.
Mm-hmm. To reference a more famous YouTuber's video with a quote, "I know what that is. I understand that reference."
Which one? I rambled for a bit.
That's Red Letter Media. That was from their review on the Star Wars movie Rogue One.
Oh, okay.
So
anyway, that is actually what I kind of find interesting about Eradicator. In fact, his very first issue is the one issue I actually own of any of this. In how they bring back Kal-El, but they don't bring back Clark, and you see that Superman is not necessarily the actual hero here, right? You take those powers and you just put them into anything without a person behind it, and it can actually be a really awful thing. And you end up having this at the very end of that issue. It was so interesting, right? How Lois is saying, she thinks for a brief second that Clark is back, and then she's like, holy crap, I've lost him all over again.
That was a good moment.
This isn't him.
It's a good moment.
It does not, there's no way it's a coincidence that in that very same issue, you have another
Bibbo!
Person, right?
Yeah, man!
Without any of the powers, and yet he's going to be a better Superman than Eradicator will ever be.
He's better than all of them. He's the best.
Can I make a suggestion?
He has the spirit.
Doomsday should have survived, and somehow it should have been Bibbo who beat him in the end.
No, I agree.
That would be a fine else world type thing. I would read that as a side comic.
I agree. Although let me put it this way: having Bibbo do something in the final fight with Cyborg Superman would have been great. I would have loved to have seen him do more but it's kind of okay that they didn't, because I'm with you, Cartoonicus. I kind of Bibbo should have been given more spotlight, But the fact that they gave him just this little bit of background spotlight to show here's what an average everyday man and the difference he can make. He doesn't have to save the world. He saves a puppy. And that actually is almost more of a difference than blowing aliens up. Doing the being inspired to be a better human being in your community. And because what he does after this is he goes to the waterfront. Yeah, he goes to the waterfront. He makes a bunch of sandwiches and he staples them together. And people go, "Why did you staple the saran wrap together?" And he says, "Shut up! It's fresh food." But his heart is so in doing good for the community that he really is the spirit. Like Metal said, he's embodying the spirit as best as a flawed man can, and that actually makes him more of a Superman in some ways and more endearing.
Well, and that that's what I'm saying is that these two
he's a
things
Superman
are
if you
contrasting each
separate
other
the two words.
in this same
exactly.
issue, right? Is that we're seeing Eradicator be the exact opposite, and there's this really awful line that have I lost? Shoot, it's when he's about to go out and become Superman again, and he basically says like, the world needs me. They want me. I have to be their champion again, I think is his words. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this comes with so much, just elitism, fascism, right? And then I think, crap, this is like pretty much what they say about normal Superman all the time in modern stuff nowadays. Right?
Well, the point is that Eradicator
be their hero. You have to be their hope.
The point is that Eradicator he's embodying parts of the mission, but he's doing it so unilaterally that like I said, he has no compassion, and so he's missing a core part. So they write that very intentionally to be.
I mean, Eradicator is the Kryptonian. He's supposed to be the embodiment of the Kryptonian ethos from the generation before Clark, before Clark's parents, I should say. And so that's the sterile, the make your kids in an artificial womb, the all the engineer all of your offspring. Everybody is programmed with their perfect space in the society. You're made for this kind of work. All that kind of nonsense.
He's more of like a parallel.
What I'm saying
if
is
Zod was a hero instead of a villain, or something like that.
But Clark is the farm boy, right? That's the.
But what I'm saying is, why does modern day Clark end up getting this as well? It's like
because he's only written by people from the city,
right?
I think it's people from the city. They don't understand us at all.
Yes.
What annoys me most about Superman in general, and it probably only exists in like the last, how they just try to make the universe revolve around him.
As insane as the Frank Miller Superman was, it does a better job of representing Heartland America Superman than anything they've attempted to do in the more recent comics.
He's not. Apart from him working for Ronald Reagan, he's actually.
No. I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about the one Frank Miller did recently, where Superman went to the Navy SEALs.
Oh, okay.
What? Okay.
I don't think any of us know what you're talking about.
No, Frank Miller did a recent mini of Superman, which is made to be his definitive Superman story.
Oh, that's right. I remember hearing about that.
And it's weird. It's really weird, but it has more of a sense of what people in Middle America are like. I mean, it has Superman as a baby using psychic powers to impress himself upon Ma and Pa Kent, so they treat him like an actual child. It's weird.
That's I'm sorry.
And it's framed around Lana, Lori, Lois, and then Wonder Woman.
I like Frank, but he's I don't know.
It was a book that needed a strong editor to say, "Listen, Frank, you're a living legend, but we need you to tone it down in some places."
Well, that's been true for decades.
Everything just needs a strong editor right now. I think that's the biggest problem with all of this stuff.
Sometimes it just needs an editor.
Imagine trying to edit Frank Miller, though. It's hard because like he is a legend in a lot of ways, and so there's a barrier to editing. So I have some compassion for that. I agree. I think a lot of I wanted to make a joke about I think I could fix Bendis in editing if they would let me. I think a
lot of people could.
I can fix him.
I don't think
anybody could.
I can fix him. But yeah,
a lot of his ideas definitely have strong potential. He just definitely needs strong editing.
Yep. And somebody to bring out that red pen because.
No.
So anyway.
By the way, I liked Steel back then, but I never read Iron Man because I'm only DC and not Marvel. So and now that I've read, now that I know who Iron Man is, it's like, so he's got the exact same origin of I'm a weapons manufacturer and I regret it, and it's like, how do you get away with being that close to Iron Man?
I don't know. Isn't there a character who's it's not like Marvel has never looked at DC and said, there's this guy named Darkseid, so we're just gonna color him a little differently and call it a day.
Look, wouldn't it be funny if we pretended like we always had a Superman character going back to the 40s? And we're just gonna pretend like he had a secret publication history that we just rediscovered. We just found it lost in the vault.
I'm gonna solo screen Hutch because he's got Shaq up there for the Steel.
I thought it was an okay movie.
I never saw it.
It has charm.
I never saw
this
movie.
Haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
Do they at least call it Toastmasters? I love that name for those guns that they have. Do they at least call it Toastmasters in the movie?
I honestly don't remember.
Can you bring that picture back for a second?
Sure.
I need to say something. Okay. This costume is the equivalent of the original movie Sonic the Hedgehog design before they changed it.
No.
No.
If this is Steel, that is absolutely the equivalent.
It actually looks like the Iron Man Mark One. It's actually kind of now that Hutch says that.
It looks like he's about to play a part in a Conan movie.
Well, that's probably the same budget. I'll give you that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at when this was made.
It was what
97.
97,
yeah. And this movie got made only because Shaq wanted to make it, and he had the pull, and that's his favorite character. So
he's a huge Superman. Shaq is a huge Superman fan. So
yeah.
I mean, I like the fact, because we don't do this as often as we should, of casting a larger than life guy to play a larger than life character. It's one of the big problems with some of the Hollywood films we've gotten. It's one of the big problems with Bane in The Dark Knight Rises. Tom Hardy, even though he put on as much mass as he could, he's shorter than Christian Bale. They had to do They had to do so much forced camera perspective to try to make Bane look bigger than Batman. They had to do every camera trick in the book to try to frame it as this guy's bigger, because he's not. He's like an inch or two shorter. And
Bale, not a big guy.
So what about
in my heart, he's a big guy for me.
And they're just like, oh yeah, we intentionally casted a taller Batman because we wanted to bring Superman down. I'm like, what?
It's just you gotta, it's so I will give that to Steel, because like John Henry Irons or Henry Johnson in the comics is a huge man. He's impossibly large in a lot of comic book large, and the only way they could get anywhere close to that is to get Shaq to play it. So he's at least got a certain level.
I'd recommend
presence.
it. Yeah. Honestly, I wouldn't. It's not like a great adaptation or even that great of a movie, but there's a lot of love put into it, and there's a lot of charm to the movie, and I think you actually can enjoy it if you go back and watch it.
Mm-hmm. So. I love it where he saves this couple's life from they're being robbed, and he saves them, and then when he's actually brought into the police station, they're like, oh no, that wasn't him, and they're like smiling because they're saved the guy who saved their lives, and there's a lot of good writing in it, but it's yeah. It's also where I met Ray J for the first time. He's in that. the rapper, not the Ray J Johnson guy, but yeah, Ray J is the kid in that, and yeah, this is before he met the Kardashians. So
I think I find it more funny. I find it more funny that when they first introduced Steel, and I like it in the cartoon because they actually made the handle of his mallet, steel, like metal. But when they first introduced the character, it's like wooden. I got a wooden shaft, and I'm like, you can't be a Superman level tier character and have a wooden shaft on your weapon. That's just
especially
dumb.
with your name being Steel. Like everything needs to be metal.
Yeah.
So there, Hutch, there's my line. My line right there is I draw the line at the wooden shaft for Steel's hammer. I don't believe it. It's terrible.
Do you think
well, in the movie, they say they have a good shaft because, of course, that line is said by Shaft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Damn right.
The guy from Shaft is in the movie. He says, "I like the shaft," and it's like it's an inside joke. Yeah.
Do you think when they created this character, Marvel wanted to sue?
No. They can't. There's
you can have the $10 the movie made.
They rip each other off so often. Like it's only in the most blatant cases that one of them will actually say, "Excuse me."
So John Henry,
like Wade Wilson and Slade Wilson.
Yeah.
But
I mean, Rob says he didn't steal that, but John Henry Irons is a takeoff on John Henry.
Right.
He's in a suit of iron. Yeah. And he's got an S because he's Steel, and he's got a Superman cape because he was trying to be alternate Superman.
Neostar brings up a great point. Steel versus Metallo was a low-key, brilliant matchup. It was quite good.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, it was good stuff.
You talking about cartoon, or was there a comic version?
There was. I'm sure there was a comic. I'm sure there's. They've. I think Neostar's referring to the cartoon.
Okay. Because I thought that was kind of brilliant how the hammer happened to fit right into the slot in his chest.
This is convenient. Well, yeah. Sometimes you just got matches made in heaven.
Well, that works.
All right. Well, I could praise Dwayne McDuffie all day, but do we have any closing thoughts on Death and Return of Superman? It's no. I recommend it. Go and read it.
I'm glad it happened. One thing I didn't talk about much with the Doomsday is I love Doomsday's design. When I first saw that, my God, I was terrified.
They made him scary.
It's a great horrifying design, and man, how does Zack Snyder screw that up? Anyway, yeah,
good point.
I don't even get it.
It is a great design. I do have to agree. That is, and they don't do it justice on much of anything except on the Krypton series. They got really close, and it looked really good.
Yeah, I didn't watch that at all.
I love his goggle look before the wrapping paper on him essentially. Yeah. Which and then like you unwrap the gift and then you get the horrible monster. But the wrapping paper that he's in is really ominous too. Yes. He's in this kind of like mysterious sort of spacesuit, and he has this crazy level of power, and you're just kind of wondering what's underneath that. And then over the course of the battle, he gets more and more damage until you get to see him, and then it's like, oh gosh, this is even scarier than I thought. But as brought up earlier, when he starts out, he's got one hand tied behind his back, and he's completely encased in a suit that basically hides any expression that he would have. But the thing that really sells you on this is going to be a dark story, kids, is he goes out. It's like when he first breaks out of the vault that he's in. He just kind of punches his way out, and then you see him in nature. And we've often got the trope of the monster in nature who's at peace with nature. Frankenstein goes into the woods, or Frankenstein's monster goes into the woods and is at peace with the flora and fauna. So Doomsday puts his hand out, and a little bird. Remember this scene? The little bird lands on his hand, and it's like, oh, we have a monster that has maybe there'll be something to crunch. He just mercilessly crushes a poor little bird in his hand, and you go, oh, you're an utterly unredeemable piece of monster garbage. And you immediately know
monster garbage.
Monster garbage, and you immediately know that the stakes here are he's not going to be like, oh, I'm a monster, but I'm not going to hurt the kids or whatever. He's going to kill anything in his path. So they set the tone very early with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think my one thing, the reason why I don't think I was ever really sold on Doomsday is that he is missing the one thing, and I think we even talked about it earlier, and I didn't realize it until we were talking about it. And he really should have been like the raptors from Jurassic Park. There should have been a moment where Superman did try to like outthink this thing, and then it turns out it's like, oh no, he's
clever
he's
girl,
not a mindless monster. He just can't speak my language, so I think he's stupid. And then it turns out that like outthinking was never an option, and it had to come down to a fist fight. I think if that happened, I'd be more sold on him as being just like this embodiment of death. It's like, yeah, you can't even outthink death.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but we have the whole situation with Superman from Justice League Unlimited with the big fight with Darkseid. So I mean, I'm still not impressed with Doomsday in that situation.
I have an odd thought. If I have one last thing to say about it, the problem I have with it is that ice is in it, and Dan Jurgens, for some reason, he was also in charge of Justice League at the time, which is why it tied in so well. Unfortunately, it's like Guy Gardner should throw a bubble around him and take him away out of space. Again, somebody should be doing something besides just raw power thrown at the guy. Oh, he stands up for the raw power. Something a little smarter than that. But I tend to overthink things.
Well,
but
don't forget there were 14 million futures. Oh wait, that's the wrong.
Well, anyway, the thing that Dan Jurgens took over Justice League from Giffen, and he immediately has Ice switch her affections from Guy Gardner to Superman, and she's just mooning over Superman all the time and how wonderful he is. And Guy Gardner is not as good, and it's just it doesn't seem in character at all. And so she's in the last page where Superman's dead, and it's like she's just it bugs me that she's there. It's like this should be Superman's story, and I agree that all the Justice League characters should kind of be there in the background, but I don't know. It reminds me that how much I didn't like his take on Justice League at the time. I didn't like his writing Justice League. So anyway, that's all. That's a little distraction, I guess, when I'm looking at this awesome picture of Superman being dead. So next.
Like Neostar.
You're right.
Superman versus a pack of half a dozen smaller, weaker Doomsdays.
It's like a bear fending off a pack of wolves.
I'd actually like to see that.
Clever girl.
The smaller, weaker, smarter Doomsdays.
Yes.
Just all pairs.
Or like a Mazo, that the more you beat him, he just comes back stronger.
I mean, that's kind of what they ended up doing with Doomsday later.
That was I think the eventual pitch they went with there.
Multiplex, the Firestorm villain, every time you hit him with energy, he splits into two half-size versions, and maybe Doomsday could like absorb that power or something.
Oh, like Doomsday keeps splitting and his power halves each time, but he's also still Doomsday, so he's constantly getting stronger, and you just end up with multiple Doomsdays, but they're smaller.
Oh, you guys are giving me a headache here.
No, what you have to do is you have to shoot right in that specific spot for quite a while, and then he explodes and somehow gets bigger and even stronger for the next part of the battle. And then you keep doing that until you've gone through 5 health bars.
Well, the basic idea that Dan Jurgens gave him is that he comes every time he's killed, he comes back and he's like he's he's kind of like the last thing that killed him. Right. And he keeps evolving because he's able to like shoot out his bone claws and things like that. So I did read the Superman Doomsday 3-parter, and that explained it. Aside from him being from Krypton, I liked that it fleshed out this villain and kind of gave him a backstory, but I wish he'd been from another planet than Krypton. So that's all.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm talking too much. Sorry.
Yeah. Hutch really means it this time. That's all. We probably ought to call it a
Yeah.
show. I think we've said everything there is to say, right?
Yeah.
No, but
Yeah.
but we could be here all night.
Yeah. It's
Otherwise-
like,
Yeah. So,
I recommend the Puss in Boots movie too.
Yeah, to answer your question, Reese, I saw you were asking about that image in the chat. It was just related to what Trillis was saying about, so you're just a pure monster.
Yeah. I got the relation to it, but I don't know who these people are. I keep seeing them on Twitter, and I don't know what that is.
It's just part from the Puss in Boots movie where Jiminy Cricket has been trying to be this guy's conscience, and he suddenly comes to the realization, holy crap, you're an irredeemable monster. And his response is, oh, really? You just figuring that out?
See, I knew that's
a good movie.
I read it.
You should see it,
but I still didn't know who they were. So now I know they're from the Puss in Boots movie I haven't seen, which is fine. Hollywood doesn't.
It's really good. It's really good for a sequel to a spin-off of a Shrek movie. Yeah.
And now we're getting Shrek 5.
Yeah. I've heard people say that it was way better than it had any right to be.
Absolutely, it was.
Oh, because the other Puss in Boots was awful.
Awful. Yeah.
So, anyhow, I don't know what we're doing next week for sure. I think we might be talking about wholesome comics next week. Or we might take the week off. I'm not sure. Because it's getting close to finals for me, and I'm pretty tired. So I'm thinking we might take the next week off.
Good luck with finals.
Oh, I still got like 3 weeks, but I'm starting to wear out. So I'm thinking maybe it's smart to. Well, you can talk at the backstage. You guys, the fans, you guys watching, I appreciate it. Let's
keep them hanging.
Listen to me complain.
Make them want more.
My life. You guys will figure it out. Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. This has been a fun conversation. Going back to a moment one of those moments that cemented me into my love of comics. I was pretty well addicted at that point, but I became part of a larger world. Does anybody have anything they're working on they want to pitch before we leave?
I mean, always read Omega Girl and Super Schooled.
I think it's the normal stuff this time.
It's pretty normal stuff. Yeah. A new Page of Forces should be coming out this weekend, I think. So yeah, I'm excited about that.
I'm working on my new videos series called You Lousy Kids.
Oh,
which is I'm embracing the fact that I'm 53 and I'm addressing these little punks who all have YouTube stuff, and so from my perspective.
And while our friend Matt C isn't here, he's currently in the middle of a meme war with Doug TenNapel.
Okay,
trying to get Doug.
He's trying to start one. I don't know if it's taken.
No, Doug has taken a few bites of the apple.
Oh, has he? I haven't seen him.
But he hasn't got Doug fighting on the hook yet.
Oh, okay.
I didn't see that. All I saw was the weird back and forth between Josh the cartoon guy and Marm.
Yeah, anyway, no, Doug has weighed in.
Yeah, okay. Well, also,
all more reason to stay off Twitter.
If you want to own a Superman-like character comic that I've written that you technically could read for free, you go and buy a copy of Hymn of Valor. And I don't shill the physical versions of my stuff often enough, so
it's available on Indie Planet.
Indie Planet, yeah, I put the link in the chat.
Well, hey, there you go. Check it out. Go check it out. I have read Hymn of Valor 1. It is good. It is good. I really enjoyed it. It's more whimsical than it has any right to be.
I'm full of whimsy.
That's my pocket review. I enjoyed it. I keep thinking I'm forgetting something, but I don't know what it is. Hey, listen. No matter when the next time is, until next time, get out there and read some comics, people. Come on. What are you doing? Get off the internet. Go read a book. Have a good night, guys.